belly fat and fasting insulin levels are predictors of growth hormone release. And if you look down here at the bottom, abdominal visceral fat and fasting insulin, important predictors of a 24-hour growth hormone release independent of age, gender, and other physiologic factors. That means it doesn't matter whether you're 8 years old. They've shown that growth hormone was reduced in 8-year-olds, 25-year-olds. It doesn't matter. If visceral fat is in, the other thing is we're fortunate that we've got this multidisciplinary clinic. So we do body mass index. We do resting metabolic calculations through respiration and calculate VO2 max. We look at that aspect of metabolism, and it's really pretty clear that and so the issue becomes, how do we start to tear apart this whole phenomena of metabolic syndrome? And when I say metabolic syndrome, it's not just, oh, you got high sugars and you're hypertensive, or you got high cholesterol and you're overweight. It's you're fatigued, your craving patterns are out of control, you ache, you are insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic, maybe type 1. You do have elevated cholesterol or borderline hypertensive at least. I mean, see, when I give all those, it's about 65% of the population. Now, the actual amount of people that have metabolic syndrome, they're estimating right now somewhere around 47 million people. That's just for the classic, my cholesterol's high, my insulin is resistant, and or I'm diabetic and I'm overweight. Now, that's American Heart Association statistics. I'm not, not making those up. So it's a big issue. This talks about interleukin-1. And it's pretty interesting when you start to look at these things. Your body's pretty smart. And so when you start to get inflamed, you start throwing out little compounds. So you'll throw out this deal. You're trying to secrete anti-inflammatory compounds. You know what happens when you've got belly fat and you're trying to secrete compounds to stop the inflammation? You start secreting something called interleukin-1. And interleukin-1R, you know what it does? It stops the counter-regulation of inflammation in your body. So it blocks your body's ability to neutralize the inflammatory process that's going on within you. And that's why people seemingly make a never-ending march towards their disease, right? You don't become diabetic overnight, you don't have heart disease overnight, and you don't have cancer overnight. You're metabolically uncoupling yourself year by year most of the time. Sure, there's traumatic events. You could get a viral insult to your heart. You could get get hit by a car. You have all kinds of acute episodic things that happen, but the reality is, for most of us in here, every one of us in here, we are on two paths. Two. That's it. There's no in-betweens. You are either healthy or you're not. You are either promoting inflammation, you are deficient in nutrients, stress is overwhelming your chemistry, your hormone profiles are out of balance, you're low in serotonin, your PEA is high so you can't get to sleep at night, your brains are racing like a clock, or your chemistry's healthy. You see, there's not really almost healthy. Once I throw one pebble in the pond, the beautiful thing about our body is it's incredibly resilient to a point. But once I throw one pebble in the pond, my counter-regulations can start to falter. And that's the issue of metabolism, and why multiple nutrients are so needed, because you got to affect all different pathways at one time for people. You can't just sit there and go, you know what, we're going to give you one thing and it's going to fix everything on you. It's not going to happen. Oh, we're not even going to make a comment on that. Quality of carbohydrates eaten may affect heart disease. C-reactive protein levels are related to fasting insulin. I only want to make one comment on this. I've done a lot of blood studies in the last year looking at C-reactive protein on people. And it is not their fasting insulin that shows high C-reactive protein as often as a 2-hour postprandial challenge. So a lot of people come in with a low fasting insulin that may be 50, 60 pounds overweight, but then I'll have them eat a piece of cheesecake, and then I'll pull their blood 2 hours later and look at their insulin levels. They're shooting insulin through the roof, and their glucose is high at the same time. Why? Because they're pumping tons of insulin out, trying to get that glucose to get on board, and they can't do it. They cannot get that glucose to move into the cells. So it's much more important. And fasting insulin's in the literature a lot, but I can tell you there are a lot more people with terrible insulin response when they eat food. Because it's interesting, a lot of people who tend to be overweight, you look at their caloric intake, it's not that much. They may eat one time a day. And it's usually after 5 o'clock. So their fasting sugars are typically low until you check it. I kind of went through this. 900,000 adults followed 20 years. Compared to normal body weight, obese subjects were much more likely to die of any of several types of cancer. The risk increased as BMI increased. BMI of the last 40, of at least 40, increased risk of death from all cancer, 52 to 62% in males and females. So how are we going to go about attacking metabolism and looking at not just obesity, but it's about how do we get people to go from chronically ill chemistry, chronic inflammatory chemistry, chronic cortisol induction, chronic IL-1R induction, chronic interleukin-6, TNF-alpha. How are we going to get past that and get people back to moving down that path towards health? I mean, that's what we really have to try and do. So when you look at it, this is kind of one way to approach looking at what happens to people in their chemistry. You've got their genetics. Okay, my mom's giving me my genetics, but the reality, mom and dad give me genetics and everyone in behind, but 75% of your genetics are controlled by you, right? I mean, literally, what you do to yourself and what the environment does to you guides 75% of your genetics. 25%, it's crapshoot. You kind of lose out, right? You're going to be more prone for certain things. Miasms, interesting. We're now talking about metabolic memory is in the clinical literature, as if our DNA had a program running in it that we have to erase. In homeopathy, the term was coined was miasms, which was basically you got information handed to you generations down that makes you more prone to do certain things in your chemistry. The next one, birth trauma. Did you get hit with lots of antibiotics at birth? Did you happen to be a boy who has got 2 recessed genes for the 677T and the 1298C, 5-MTHFR gene, and now you can't dump the preservative from the vaccine they gave you at birth? Great studies being done on that have linked that now. I mean, this is published in the medical literature, right? So if I'm a boy and I got higher levels of testosterone, I can't get rid of the mercury. If I don't methylate well, I can't get rid of these byproducts. So birth trauma. Antibiotics at birth. Strep B mom, baby gets an IV bag of antibiotics. 2 weeks later, baby's got thrush. There goes your mucosal barrier. Inadequate nutrition. So we start. Inadequate nutrition, toxic exposure, poor elimination, not enough water. The controversy over things like fluoride. I mean, even the EPA now, the Union of EPA scientists are just absolutely lobbying against fluoride. So, I mean, all these issues kind of circulating that could be influencing our chemistry. What happens? As we age, we get accumulated toxicity. It imbalances our pH. We become more acidic most of the time until we get really ill. We get inactivation or alteration of our cellular function. So our body, either we get binding of hormones or enzymes don't function because the pH isn't correct, or you don't have enough selenium, you don't have enough chromium, you don't have enough amino acids. Any of these things can start to throw it off. What starts to happen then? I oxygenate my tissues less. I oxidize my tissues more. Cancer, heart disease, mitochondrial wasting, autoimmunity. It's kind of what happens. It's just like kind of a flow-through chart. And you know what? You don't have to be 70 for this to happen nowadays. This happens in 10-year-olds. This happens in 6-year-olds.